Casey Stoner, the silent return that shook Sepang. He wasn't supposed to come back. Casey Stoner had walked away from MotoGP in 2012 while still at the height of his powers. A two-time world champion with raw, unfiltered speed. One of the very few riders who could defeat Valentino Rossi at his absolute peak, and did it more than once. He left the sport not because he was finished, but because he was fed up with politics, with the press, with being misunderstood. When he retired at just 27, people assumed that was it. No wildcard talks, no coaching ambitions, no media gigs. He vanished into Australia's outback with his young family, fishing rods, and motocross gear. The only glimpses of him came from the occasional Ducati promo or whispers that he might test a production bike just for fun. Then, in 2016, out of nowhere, Ducati announced the return of their prodigal son, not as a racer, but as a test rider. Nobody took it seriously. Test riders, after all, aren't a threat. They're support characters. They show up quietly, ride a few laps, give feedback, and stay out of the spotlight. But this was Casey Stoner, and he wasn't coming back to make tea and test fairings. In Sepang, Malaysia, under brutal humidity and punishing heat, Stoner stepped into his old leathers and mounted the latest Ducati Desmosedici. It had been 4 years since he last rode a MotoGP bike. 4 years without feeling the tire slip at 320 kilometers per hour, without trail braking into hairpins, without snapping the throttle wide open on the exit. The paddock expected rust. What they got was rage. Within a handful of laps, Stoner was within a few tenths of Ducati's factory riders, Andrea Iannone and Andrea Dovizioso. He wasn't just matching their pace. He was doing it cleanly, consistently, and without needing time to adjust. Every lap was scalpel precise. His corner speed was identical to riders who had spent the last 2 years pushing the bike to its limits. Then, the whispers began. Stoner is faster than both Andreas. At first, people thought it was just early day test weirdness. Then day 2 came. Stoner was quicker again. He was lapping faster than Dovizioso, Ducati's top rider. Factory engineers started calling other garages just to confirm lap charts. The timing screens didn't lie. And what really terrified people, he wasn't even trying. Observers said Stoner looked bored on the bike. No body English, no muscling the machine, just fluid motion, pure instinct. One Ducati insider was quoted saying, "If he asks for a race seat, we'll give it to him before he finishes the sentence." Other riders watched nervously. Crutchlow later admitted that if Stoner did wildcard, half the grid would be terrified. Reporters hounded him. Was he coming back? Stoner smiled. "I'm just testing." But the message was clear. If he ever wanted to return, the sport would tremble. In 2 days, Stoner reminded the entire MotoGP grid that you don't need a starting number to destroy egos. He didn't need the race. He already proved his point. Valentino Rossi, the phoenix who refused to burn out. By 2012, the world had given up on Valentino Rossi. He was no longer the untouchable magician of the 2000s, no longer the master of late-breaking, inch-perfect passes and championship drama. His 2-year stint at Ducati was a disaster. He didn't win a single race. In fact, he barely finished on the podium. The Desmosedici was unrideable, unpredictable, and, according to Rossi himself, like dancing with a fridge on gravel. He begged Ducati to redesign it. They refused. The relationship soured. The headlines were brutal. "The doctor is dead." Fans were heartbroken. Pundits wrote obituaries for his career. His rivals, especially Lorenzo and a rising Marc Marquez, quietly assumed he was done. But Rossi wasn't finished. In 2013, he returned to Yamaha. Some said it was a vanity move. Others claimed it was just a farewell tour. But inside Rossi's mind, something had reignited. He didn't want to leave as a loser. He wanted to make the paddock remember his name. At the very first race in Qatar, he didn't wait. He charged through the field and finished second, beating riders half his age who had never raced him in his prime. He fought Marquez like it was 2009 again, elbows out, inches from disaster. The whole world leaned forward in their chairs. Then came Assen, the cathedral of speed, a track Rossi had always loved. But this time, he was the underdog. Lorenzo was injured. Marquez was fast. Pedrosa was pressuring. And yet, Rossi led from lap 1. He controlled the race with masterful precision. Not a single mistake. He danced the M1 through every chicane like it was an extension of his body. When he crossed the finish line, it was more than a win. win. It was a resurrection. He had broken a 44-race winless streak. The paddock exploded. Mechanics who had worked with him for a decade cried on pit wall. The Dutch fans, thousands of them wearing yellow, went ballistic. And Rossi, he stood on the top step, beaming, helmet in hand, face to the sky. The comeback was complete, but he didn't stop there. From 2013 to 2015, Rossi would go on to win races, fight for a title, and reclaim his place among the elite. He proved that you could fall hard, fail publicly, be mocked worldwide, and still return to the front. He was no longer just a legend. He became the living proof that greatness never dies. It just waits for the right moment to strike again. Marc Marquez, the arm that shouldn't have come back. No rider had ever won 6 Premier Class titles as quickly as Marc Marquez. By 2019, he looked invincible, sliding the front tire into corners like physics didn't apply, saving crashes that defied logic. He was the golden child of Honda, the modern gladiator, the man no one could touch. Then came Jerez, 2020. Marquez was leading the race when he saved a near high side that would have ended most riders' careers. Fans called it another miracle, but a few laps later, it happened again, and this time, he didn't land it. The high side launched him off the bike. He hit the ground at speed and fractured his right humerus, his dominant arm. The comeback began and failed immediately. Just 48 hours later, Marquez flew back to Jerez and tried to ride again with a metal plate freshly inserted in his arm. Everyone said it was impossible. Doctors, commentators, even Honda themselves. But he tried, and it nearly ruined him. The plate failed. The injury worsened. Infection set in. 3 surgeries followed. Over 9 months, Marquez vanished from the grid, battling nerve damage, emotional breakdowns, and the terrifying thought that his arm and his career might never return to form. And then, in 2021, he came back, still recovering, arm barely mobile, nerve not fully healed. His first races were a struggle. He crashed, he fought, he cried in the paddock, but he didn't stop. And then came Sachsenring, a circuit where Marquez had won every single race since 2010. A left-hand heavy track, perfect for protecting his injured right arm. From the first practice, he looked like his old self. In the race, he launched off the line, took the lead early, and never gave it up. Every lap, the cameras panned to his eyes. Focused, relentless, angry. The entire paddock watched in disbelief as a man who shouldn't even be racing anymore controlled the race like no time had passed. When he crossed the line, he screamed into his helmet, cried into his gloves. The paddock erupted. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a revenge arc against his own body, a moment that silenced doubters. Marquez had beaten not just the grid, but his own broken anatomy. Dani Pedrosa, the wild card that made the grid sweat. Dani Pedrosa was always MotoGP's quiet killer, a small man with surgical precision, 3-time world champion in the smaller classes, a 31-time Premier Class race winner. He never won the MotoGP title, but every rider knew if Dani was behind you, he was coming past clean, fast, and without drama. He retired in 2018. No press storm, no farewell documentary, just a wave, a handshake, and silence. Then, in 2021, he returned, not as a racer, as KTM's test rider, until Spielberg. KTM handed him a wildcard entry for the Styrian Grand Prix. Just one race. No expectations. The world barely noticed. Most people saw it as a marketing stunt. But the grid didn't laugh for long. Free practice 1. Pedrosa placed 3rd, immediately faster than half the full-time field. In qualifying, he didn't blow minds. But in the race, he went to war. When the lights went out, Pedrosa mixed it up with riders who'd been sharpening their racecraft for years while he'd been testing in silence. He looked calm, clinical. The way he handled the chaos around him was textbook Dani. Never aggressive, always calculated. Mid-race, a horrific crash involving Zarko brought out the red flag. Bikes exploded. Fires broke out. Pedrosa had just barely avoided the carnage. He remounted, restarted, and finished 10th, ahead of factory riders, on a bike he'd never raced in real conditions. After 3 years of no competition, at 35 years old, and most importantly, he proved something the grid already suspected. Dani Pedrosa never lost it. He just stepped back and came back when the world wasn't ready. Andrea Dovizioso, the return no one expected. In 2020, Andrea Dovizioso walked away from MotoGP, tired of the politics at Ducati, tired of being second place in the standings year after year behind Marquez, tired of riding the most unpredictable bike on the grid while fighting a machine and a corporate ego at the same time. He took a break. No testing, no training, just silence. Everyone assumed he was done. Then, in late 2021, Yamaha's satellite team, Petronas SRT, called him. They needed a replacement for the struggling Franco Morbidelli, who was promoted to factory. The seat was temporary. The bike was uncompetitive. The team was in financial crisis. Dovizioso said yes. He returned on an unfamiliar bike, on a team in transition, on a grid that had gotten younger, faster, and more ruthless in his absence. But Dovi didn't care. He didn't fight for points. He fought for form. He used every race to relearn MotoGP. Tires, fuel maps, ride height devices. His telemetry was clean. His work ethic was unchanged. In 2022, Yamaha gave him a full-season contract with RNF. The results never came, but the effort, the attitude, impeccable. Even in 17th, riders behind him said Dovi was one of the hardest men to pass. And when he finally said goodbye, mid-season at Misano, the entire paddock lined up in pit lane. Mechanics, engineers, riders, all stood and applauded as he entered the box one last time. Because Andrea Dovizioso didn't come back for wins. He came back for the love of riding. And in doing so, reminded everyone that sometimes comeback stories aren't about standing on a podium. They're about leaving on your own terms. Johan Zarko, from broken to back again. Johan Zarko's career was on life support in 2019. He had been a double Moto2 world champion, one of the hottest rookies in MotoGP, with aggressive passes and wild corner entry styles. Yamaha's Tech 3 team gave him the machinery to shine. Podiums came, so did praise. But then, he made the move that nearly killed his career. He signed for KTM. The KTM RC16 was a beast. Unstable, unpredictable, nothing like the smooth Yamaha M1 he'd mastered. Zarko didn't just struggle. He fell apart. Race after race, he finished outside the top 10. His confidence vanished. His body language turned stiff. He crashed. He doubted himself. Then came the biggest shock. He quit mid-season. Riders don't do that. They ride it out. They grind. But Zarko couldn't fake it anymore. He walked away from a multi-million euro contract, publicly admitting he was mentally broken. Everyone thought it was over. But then, the unthinkable happened. He re-emerged weeks later, riding an outdated LCR Honda as a stand-in for the injured Nakagami. It was the worst bike on the grid for satellite riders. Yet he scored points. People raised eyebrows. Could Zarko really claw his way back? Then came a Vintia Ducati in 2020, a bike no one wanted, a team considered MotoGP's backmarkers. But Zarko turned that machine into a missile. He put it on the front row in Brno. Then he led a race. Then he stood on the podium. The grid stared in disbelief. This was the same man who had walked away in tears a year ago, now flying past factory Yamahas and Suzukis on a bike that statistically had no business being there. Ducati saw it. They promoted him to Pramac, from broken to reborn, from forgotten to feared again. Johan Zarko's comeback wasn't just about speed. It was about surviving when the sport eats you alive and clawing your way back with nothing but belief and a throttle hand. Alex Espargaro, the redemption no one saw coming. For over a decade, Alex Espargaro was the guy you didn't notice. Not because he lacked talent, but because he always rode for teams that couldn't give him a winning machine. Suzuki, Forward Yamaha, Art, and then Aprilia. In 2017, he joined Aprilia's MotoGP project. At the time, it was the paddock joke. The bike was slow, fragile, unpredictable. Most thought Aprilia was just there to fulfill contract obligations. Riders came and went. Mechanics left mid-season. Sponsors vanished. But Alex stayed, season after season. Through DNFs, breakdowns, and humiliating gaps to the front runners, he kept grinding. He tested endlessly, rode through injuries, motivated engineers, held meetings when management gave up. By 2021, the RSGP was finally okay, and in 2022, it became a contender. At Termas de Rio Hondo, Alex put Aprilia on pole position, the first in their MotoGP history. Then, on race day, he fought toe-to-toe with Jorge Martin. Lap after lap, it was a duel of precision and will. On the final lap, Alex held his nerve, and when he crossed the line in first place, the entire grid stood still. Aprilia had never won in the modern MotoGP era, and Alex, he had waited 200+ races for this moment. He cried in Parc Fermé. His crew, many of whom had doubted this bike for years, broke down. Even his rivals applauded. He didn't stop there. He stayed in the title fight for most of the season, took podiums, led laps, fought against factory Ducatis and Yamahas like he belonged there. Because he did. Alex Espargaro's comeback wasn't about returning from injury. It was about returning from irrelevance, about believing in a dream no one else cared about dragging a brand up the grid with sheer willpower, and proving, finally, that loyalty has a finish line too, and his had 1 peso on it.